My name is Amber Townsend. I was 32 years old the night my mother called me at 2 in the morning to tell me I was allowed to attend my own brother's engagement dinner, on one condition. Keep your mouth shut, she said. No hello. No how are you. Just orders, like I was still 18 and too young to know better. Her reason was simple. My brother Kyle's fiancé had a father, a decorated colonel, retired U.S. Army, and my mother was terrified I'd embarrass the family the way she said I always did. So I smiled in the dark of my hotel room and said, "Got it." I hung up. I looked at the uniform hanging in the closet beside the dress I'd bought for that dinner. My dress blues, captain's bars on the shoulders, 3 deployment patches on the sleeve. My mother didn't know, or didn't care, that the colonel she was so desperate to impress had pinned a medal on my chest 3 years earlier at Fort Campbell. She didn't know, because she'd never asked. What happened at that dinner table is the reason I'm telling you this story today. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is the channel where we share stories about family secrets, broken trust, and the moments people finally stand up for themselves. If Amber's story hits close to home, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Let me back up to that phone call. I'd driven 7 hours from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, to Roanoke, Virginia, that afternoon. 7 hours of Blue Ridge Highway and rest stop coffee just to sit at a table with people who wished I wasn't coming. I checked into a Holiday Inn near the interstate around 9, showered, set my alarm for 0600 out of habit. Then at 2:07 a.m., my phone lit up. Mom. I answered because that's what you do when your mother calls in the middle of the night. You answer because you think someone might be dead. Nobody was dead. Tomorrow, she said, you can join your brother's fiancé's family for dinner, but keep your mouth shut. Her voice had that particular edge, the one she uses when she's rehearsed what she's going to say. I asked why. She didn't hesitate. Her dad's a decorated colonel. Don't embarrass us like you always do. Like I always do. As if there were a catalog of my failures she kept filed in a drawer somewhere, alphabetized and cross-referenced. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed in my t-shirt and running shorts, phone warm against my ear, and I said, "Got it." She hung up first. She always hangs up first. I set the phone on the nightstand and looked across the room at the closet. The dress blues hung on the left. The black dress hung on the right. 2 versions of me, side by side in a roadside hotel room in the town where I grew up and never quite belonged. 14 years earlier, I was standing in our kitchen on Brambleton Avenue with an enlistment contract on the counter and my mother's face white as a dinner plate. My father had been gone 2 years by then, heart attack at 51, mid-shift at the paper mill. Mom had just started her catering business out of our kitchen. Trays of deviled eggs and pulled pork sliders lined up on the counter next to my paperwork. She needed help. She needed me to stay. Kyle was 14 and useless with a chafing dish. I raised you to be here, she said. Not for me. For her. I tried to explain. The army wasn't about leaving. It was about building something that was mine. Something I could stand on that nobody handed me and nobody could take away. She didn't hear any of it. The morning I left for basic, I put my duffel in the trunk of a taxi at 6 a.m. She stood on the porch in her bathrobe. She didn't hug me. She said, "If you walk out that door, don't expect me to wait." I walked out. She didn't wait. Over the next 14 years, every holiday visit felt like a performance review I'd already failed. Lorraine Townsend, that's my mother Lorraine, treated me like a guest she hadn't invited. Polite, distant, cold in ways that left no fingerprints. Kyle learned the lesson early. He stayed. He helped with the catering. He answered her calls on the first ring. And in our family's quiet arithmetic, staying equaled love and leaving equaled betrayal. I didn't leave to hurt her. I left because staying would have cost me everything I'd become. Morning, 6 a.m. alarm. 30 minutes of push-ups and planks on the hotel carpet because the gym didn't open until 7. Black coffee from the lobby machine. A phone call to my unit back at Campbell. Supply manifest for an upcoming training rotation. Nothing urgent, but I checked in because that's how I'm wired. Routine keeps me level. Routine is the thing that holds the rest of me together when everything else goes sideways. At 8:15, my phone buzzed. Kyle. A text. Dinner tonight at Bellhurst Grill. 7 p.m. Dress nice. And Amber. Just sit there and smile. Don't talk about the army stuff. It makes people uncomfortable. I read it twice. The army stuff. 14 years of service, 3 deployments, a commendation medal, and a supply chain that kept 3 forward operating bases fed and fueled in Helmand Province. And my brother called it the army stuff. Like it was a hobby. Like I collected stamps. I didn't reply. I opened the closet instead. The dress blues on the left, the black dress on the right. I reached for the dress. Not because I was ashamed of the uniform, I've never been ashamed of it. But because tonight was Kyle's engagement dinner, not mine. Wearing a uniform to someone else's celebration would make me the headline, and that wasn't the point. The point was seeing my brother's face before I deployed again in 60 days. That was the whole reason I drove 7 hours. Just his face. That was it. Around 10, another text came in. Unknown number. I opened it. The text was from Megan Harlan, Kyle's fiancée. He'd given her my number. Hi, Amber. So excited to finally meet you tonight. Kyle's told me so much about you. Just a heads up. My dad is pretty traditional, so try to keep things light and fun, okay? He doesn't love heavy topics at dinner. I stared at the screen. Kyle's told me so much about you. That sentence carried weight I could measure. The question was what, exactly, he'd told her. I called Kyle. He picked up on the third ring, voice tight and cheerful, the way it gets when he's performing. Hey, what's up? What exactly did you tell Megan about me? A pause. The kind that tells you someone is deciding how much truth to spend. Just the basics. That you've been traveling, doing your own thing. You know Mom doesn't love the army talk. Traveling, I said. You told her I've been traveling. Look, it's just easier this way. Her dad's a colonel, Amber. A real one. He doesn't need to hear about... He stopped himself, but not fast enough. About what, Kyle? Silence. The highway kind. Long and flat, with nothing on either side. Just be normal tonight, please. He hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed and set the phone down carefully, the way you set down something you're trying not to throw. My brother didn't just want me to be quiet. He was embarrassed by me, not by anything I'd done, by everything I'd become. A real one, he'd said, as if there were another kind. Bellhurst Grill sat on a corner in downtown Roanoke. Stone facade, burgundy awning, the kind of restaurant where the napkins are cloth and the hostess knows your name if you come often enough. Private dining room in the back. Table for 12. I arrived at 6:55, 5 minutes early, because the Army trains that into you and civilian life, never takes it out. Lorraine was already there. She stood at the far end of the table arranging white roses in a low glass vase, her back to the door. She wore a navy dress and pearls. When she turned and saw me, her eyes went from my shoes to my hair in one sweep, like a sergeant inspecting a private. At least you dressed properly for once, she said. No hello? No, you look nice. Just a grade. Pass. Barely. Kyle and Megan arrived together a few minutes later. Megan was petite, blonde, smiling the way people smile when they're nervous about something going right. She crossed the room and took my hand. Oh, you must be the sister. Kyle told me you've been traveling. Where to lately? Traveling. The word again, like a stamp on my forehead. I smiled. All over, I said. Because it was true, just not in the way she meant. Lorraine directed me to my seat, the far end of the table, 6 chairs from the head, where a place card read, Colonel James Harlan, retired. I looked at that name. My pulse ticked up 1 notch. James Harlan. I tilted my head. That name. I knew that name. Before the Harlan side arrived, Lorraine pulled me into the hallway outside the private room. The carpet was burgundy. The sconce lighting was dim. She leaned close enough that I could smell her hairspray. The same brand she'd used since I was 12. I need you to listen carefully, she said. The Harlans think Kyle comes from a stable family. 2 children, both doing well. I told them you work in hospitality, hotel management, something like that. If they ask, just nod. I blinked. You told them I work in hotel management. It's close enough to what you do. You manage supplies or whatever it is. I'm a quartermaster corps officer, Mom. I managed supply lines for 3 forward operating bases in Helmand Province. She waved her hand. A small, dismissive motion, like she was brushing away a fly. Same idea. Different words. Just don't correct me in there. She turned and walked back into the dining room. I stood in that hallway for 10 seconds. Maybe 15. I'd known she minimized my career. I'd expected that. But this was something else entirely. She hadn't downplayed what I did. She'd replaced it. She'd built a whole other Amber. One without the uniform, without the rank, without the deployments, without the medal, and handed that version to the family of a retired colonel. She'd erased me, and she'd done it so smoothly, so completely, that I realized this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment lie. She'd been telling it long enough to believe it herself. I walked back in, sat down, placed my napkin across my lap, and waited. Sitting at the table, I kept turning it over. She didn't just ask me to be quiet. She asked me to be someone else. She'd built an entire version of me, a version without the uniform, without the service, without anything I'd earned. If you've ever been erased by someone who was supposed to be proud of you, stay with me. This story is about to turn. The front door of the restaurant opened at 7:12. I heard it from my seat. The creak of the hinge, then a voice I recognized the way you recognize a song from the first 2 notes. Deep, measured. The kind of voice that spent 30 years giving orders to rooms full of people who listen the first time. Colonel James Harlan walked into the private dining room with his wife, Donna, a half step behind him. He wore a charcoal blazer over a white shirt. No uniform. But the way he moved, shoulders back, chin level, eyes scanning the room left to right before he committed to a single step, that was uniform enough. Donna was elegant. Silver hair, pearl earrings, the calm smile of a woman who'd hosted hundreds of military functions and never once lost her composure. Lorraine was on her feet before they'd cleared the doorway. Colonel Harlan, what an honor. Too loud, too eager. The colonel smiled politely. Jim, please, I'm retired. He shook Kyle's hand. Megan kissed his cheek. He said something warm to his daughter that I couldn't hear. Then he looked around the table. His gaze moved across the faces. Lorraine, Kyle's college friend, Megan's cousin, and stopped. On me. 1 second. Maybe 2. His brow creased. A micro-expression. The kind you learn to read when your job depends on reading people who aren't trying to be read. I knew him. Fort Campbell. 3 years ago. He'd stood at a podium and called my name. I'd marched forward, saluted, and he'd pinned the Army Commendation Medal on my chest. But I didn't say a word. I nodded. He nodded back. Lorraine took his arm and steered him toward the head of the table, and the moment passed. Almost. Appetizers came out. Shrimp cocktail. Bruschetta. The kind of food you eat with your fingers while pretending not to notice the tension. Lorraine ran the conversation the way she ran her catering events. Tight schedule, controlled portions, no room for surprises. She talked about Roanoke, the catering business, the new farmers market on Campbell Avenue. Kyle nodded along and added color where she left gaps. Megan smiled and touched Kyle's arm. It was a well-rehearsed production, and I was the audience member who hadn't been given a program. Donna Harlan sat across from me, 2 seats to my left. She watched Lorraine with the quiet patience of someone who's attended enough dinners to know when the host is performing. Then she turned to me. And what does your other daughter do, Lorraine? The question floated across the table like a paper airplane. Light, simple, impossible to dodge. Lorraine didn't miss a beat. Oh, Amber works in hospitality, hotel management. She's been traveling quite a bit. You know how that industry is. I heard the words come out of my mother's mouth, and I felt each one land like a small, precise cut. Hotel management, traveling, that industry. I looked down at my plate. The shrimp sat curled on its bed of ice, pink and still. From the head of the table, Colonel Harlan set down his fork. He looked at me, then at Lorraine, then back at me. He picked up his napkin, dabbed the corner of his mouth, and said nothing. Kyle jumped in. So, Megan, tell everyone about the venue you found for the reception. The subject changed, but the Colonel's eyes didn't. Donna wasn't the type to let a thread drop. Somewhere between the appetizer plates being cleared and the entrees arriving, she turned to me again with the easy warmth of a woman who'd spent 3 decades making young lieutenants' spouses feel welcome at battalion dinners. Hotel management, she said. That must keep you busy. Where are you based? I weighed my options. I could lie, which would make me complicit. I could tell the truth, which would detonate my mother's entire fiction. Or I could walk the razor edge between the two. I'm based in Kentucky right now, I said. It's high-paced work, a lot of logistics. Kentucky, that's lovely. What hotel chain? It's a government operation, actually. The word government landed softly, but it landed. Donna's eyebrows lifted a fraction. Lorraine's hand appeared from nowhere, reaching across the table for the bread basket, angling her body between Donna and me. Amber, would you pass the bread? I passed the bread. Donna let it go, but Colonel Harlan didn't. I saw him from the corner of my eye. He'd set down his water glass and was looking at me the way a man looks at a puzzle he's 90% sure he's solved. Government operation, Kentucky. Logistics. 3 data points. He tilted his head slightly, just a degree, and I watched recognition assemble itself behind his eyes the way a weather system builds on the horizon. Slow, certain, and impossible to stop once it starts. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Held it low, under the table. Scrolled through something. I didn't look directly, but I could feel it. He was checking. Main course. Pan-seared trout for most of the table. Steak for Kyle, who'd never once eaten fish without complaining. Megan, seated across from me, had been quiet for most of the meal. Watching, absorbing, filing. Now she leaned forward, elbows off the table the way a colonel's daughter would, and said, So, what exactly do you do? Like, day to day? I glanced at Lorraine. She was mid-sip, but her eyes locked onto mine over the rim of her glass. A warning, clear as a traffic light. I looked back at Megan. I make sure people have what they need, I said. Food, fuel, equipment. In places where those things aren't easy to get. Megan smiled. Oh, like event planning for remote venues? Kyle jumped in before I could answer. Something like that. I picked up my fork, set it down, picked it up again. Something like that, I said. Under the table, my right hand drifted to the pocket of my dress. The fabric was thin enough that I could feel the edge of the challenge coin through it. Heavy, round, cool against my thigh. Colonel Harlan had handed it to me the same day he'd pinned the medal. It was a tradition. You don't buy a challenge coin, you earn one. Or someone who matters gives you one. I carried it the way some people carry a photograph. Not to show anyone, just to know it was there. Across the table, the colonel was looking at his phone again. This time, he wasn't scrolling. He was staring at something on the screen. His jaw tightened. Just slightly. Just enough for someone trained to notice. Between the entree and dessert, Donna excused herself. Lorraine followed, the way she always followed anyone she wanted to manage. I watched them disappear toward the restroom and knew exactly what was about to happen. Lorraine would steer. Donna would listen. And somewhere in that conversation, my mother would reinforce the fiction she'd constructed. I found out later, from Donna herself, what was said. Donna had leaned against the marble counter and mentioned casually, Your daughter seems very measured, very composed for someone in hospitality. Lorraine had adjusted her earring in the mirror. She's always been quiet. Not much ambition, honestly. Kyle's the one with drive. Donna had pushed, gently. She mentioned a government operation. Is she with a hotel on a military base, maybe? And my mother, the woman who'd spent 30 years feeding people in Roanoke, Virginia, the woman who made her own pie crust and ironed her tablecloths, had looked Donna Harlan straight in the face and said, "Something like that. She's never been very clear about what she does. You know how some kids are." Donna nodded, smiled politely, but something didn't fit, and Donna Harlan had spent 3 decades as a military spouse. She could smell a briefing that didn't add up the way a baker smells when the bread's gone wrong. When they walked back, Donna leaned close to the colonel's ear. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw his face. He closed his eyes for 1 second, opened them, looked directly at me, and I knew. He wasn't guessing anymore. Here's what Colonel Harlan had found on his phone. I didn't learn this until weeks later, when he told me himself over coffee at his home in Blacksburg. But I'll tell you now because the timing matters. Somewhere between Donna's first question and Lorraine's hallway lie, the colonel had opened his photo gallery and typed a single word into the search bar: Townsend. The phone returned 4 results, all from the same day, the ARCOM ceremony at Fort Campbell, 3 years prior. In the first photo, the colonel stood at a podium reading a citation. In the second, he was shaking a young officer's hand. In the third, the one that mattered, he was pinning the Army Commendation Medal onto the dress uniform of Captain Amber Townsend. My face was in 3/4 profile, hair pulled tight under my beret, eyes forward, shoulders square. He zoomed in. Then he looked up from his phone and looked at me. The same woman, sitting at the end of a dinner table in a black dress, being introduced as a hotel manager who'd been drifting. Same cheekbones, same posture, same stillness under pressure. He told me later that his first feeling wasn't anger. It was confusion. He couldn't understand why a mother would erase her daughter's service. In his world, the world of military families, of sacrifice and deployment and homecomings and folded flags, a child who serves is a child you brag about. You put the bumper sticker on the car. You frame the promotion photo. You tell every stranger at the grocery store. You don't pretend she works at a hotel. He put the phone face down on the table. He straightened his napkin. He looked at Donna. She looked back. Something passed between them, the kind of communication that takes 30 years of marriage to develop and 0 words to execute. Then he waited, because a colonel knows when to act, and when to let the moment find its own shape. Dessert plates were coming out. Chocolate torte, raspberry coulis, when Lorraine stood up and walked the length of the table toward my end. She passed behind Kyle's chair, behind Megan's cousin, behind the empty seat where Donna's coat hung. She stopped beside me, bent down, and spoke close to my ear. Her breath smelled like white wine. "You're doing fine," she said. "Just keep your mouth shut through the toast and we're done." There it was again. Keep your mouth shut. The same words from the phone call, the same instruction, the same leash. "I haven't said a word, Mom." "Good. That's all I'm asking." I looked at her. Really looked. She was 58 years old and her makeup was perfect, and her pearls were straight and her hands were shaking. Not a lot, just at the fingertips, like a person holding something heavy and pretending it's light. "No," I said quietly. "That's not all you're asking. You're asking me to not exist." Her chin lifted. "Don't be dramatic." She walked back to her seat. I watched her go. She smoothed her skirt as she sat down and picked up her fork and cut a precise triangle from her torte and placed it in her mouth. And it was the single most controlled performance I'd ever seen from a woman whose control was the only thing keeping her together. And I realized something I should have realized years earlier. My silence wasn't politeness. It wasn't respect. It was complicity. Every time I kept my mouth shut, I helped her maintain a lie. Every quiet dinner, every nodded confirmation, every something like that. I'd been an accomplice in my own erasure, but I still didn't act, because this dinner was Kyle's, not mine. That restraint. It felt noble at the time. It was also the last excuse I'd ever make for her. Kyle seized the lull between dessert and coffee to make his pitch. I could see it coming. The way he adjusted his tie, the way he leaned toward Colonel Harlan's end of the table like a man angling for a handshake. Sir, I don't know if Megan mentioned. I'm starting an insurance agency here in Roanoke, Kyle said. We're specializing in coverage for military families. Life insurance, disability, retirement planning. It's a growing market. The colonel listened. He was good at listening. 32 years of command teaches you to let people talk long enough to tell you who they really are. That's a worthy cause, the colonel said. Military families are underserved. Kyle beamed. Exactly. And that's why I'd love to connect with some of your colleagues. If you have anyone in mind who might benefit from... How much do you know about military life, Kyle? The question was quiet, almost gentle, but it stopped Kyle cold. Well, I've done my research, read a lot of case studies, talked to some veterans at the... Research, the colonel said. He nodded slowly. Then he looked at me. Not a glance. A look. The kind that carries a sentence inside it. He looked at the woman who had managed supply chains in a war zone, who had served under his command, who had earned a commendation by keeping soldiers fed and equipped under fire. And then he looked at the man who wanted to sell those same soldiers' insurance policies. He looked back at Kyle. Research is a good start, he said evenly. Experience is better. Kyle laughed nervously. The table moved on. But the colonel's point had been made, and everyone who was paying attention had heard it, including me. When the table rearranged itself for coffee, chairs scooting, people swapping seats to chat, Donna Harlan moved next to me. She did it casually, the way a seasoned military spouse does everything, with purpose disguised as warmth. She stirred her coffee once, twice, and said, You said government operation and logistics, and you sit like someone who's been told to sit up straight 10,000 times. She paused. Are you military, Amber? I held her gaze. She had kind eyes and a jaw that didn't quit. I'd seen that look on the faces of 100 military spouses, women who'd held families together through deployments and relocations and middle-of-the-night phone calls from the other side of the world. Women who knew what service cost because they'd paid the bill too. Ma'am, I said, I'm not going to lie to you at your daughter's engagement dinner. Then don't. I'm a captain. Quartermaster Corps. U.S. Army. She set her coffee cup down. Carefully, like she was afraid she might drop it. You're active duty. Yes, ma'am. And your family introduced you as hotel management. I said it flat. No sarcasm, no bitterness. Just the fact, laid on the table the way you lay out a hand of cards when you've already decided to fold and you just want everyone to see what you were holding. Donna's hand went to her chest. She looked across the room at Lorraine, who was laughing at something Megan's cousin had said. Then she looked back at me. Does Jim know? I think he's figuring it out. She stood up, squeezed my shoulder once, walked to the colonel's side. I watched her lean down and whisper something into his ear. Whatever Donna said, it took about 4 seconds. The colonel listened without moving. Then he set down his coffee cup, folded his napkin, placed it beside his plate, and stood. I'd like to propose a toast before we wrap up the evening, he said. The room went quiet. Not the polite kind. The real kind. The kind where forks stop mid-air and conversations die between syllables. Lorraine smiled. I could see it from 6 seats away. The smile she reserved for moments she'd been engineering all night. The colonel was about to bless the engagement. He was about to say something gracious about Kyle and Megan and the future. This was her moment. The one that made the lying worth it. I'd like to start, the colonel said, with something unexpected. He stood up with that glass, and I could feel every pair of eyes in the room shift. My mother was smiling. She thought this was her moment, the colonel blessing her son's future. She had no idea that the man she'd spent all evening trying to impress already knew the truth. And what he did next, I still think about every single day. The colonel held his glass at chest height. Not raised yet. That's a military tell. You don't raise the glass until you're ready for people to drink. He wasn't ready. I've spent 32 years in the United States Army, he said. His voice carried the room without effort. And in that time, I've learned that you can tell everything about a family by watching how they treat each other when they think no one important is watching. He let that settle. Lorraine's smile held, but something behind it shifted. Kyle. Megan. He looked at them. Warmth in his eyes, genuine and practiced. I'm proud of you both. Marriage is a campaign. It requires planning. It requires sacrifice. And above all, it requires honesty. He said the word honesty the way a judge says guilty, with finality, with weight, and without any particular interest in debate. Tonight, the colonel continued, I'd like to talk about honesty. Lorraine's smile flickered. Just the corners. A micro-adjustment, like a pilot correcting for wind shear. The colonel set his glass down. He pushed his chair back, and he began to walk. Not toward Kyle and Megan, not toward the head of the table. He walked slowly, deliberately, down the length of the table, past Kyle's college friend, past Megan's cousin, past the empty dessert plates and the coffee cups and the crumpled napkins. Toward the end. Toward me. Each step registered. Lorraine turned in her seat, tracking him. Jim, she said, her voice 1 octave higher than it had been. The kids are at the other end of the table. He didn't stop. 5 steps. 6. 7. The room shrank with each one. I could feel my pulse in my throat, not from fear, but from recognition. This was the moment. The one I hadn't planned, hadn't engineered, hadn't asked for, but the one I'd earned simply by showing up and telling the truth to the one person who'd bothered to ask. He stopped directly in front of me. I looked up. He looked down. We held eye contact for 3 full seconds, the length of a salute, the length of a breath you take before you step off a ledge. Under the table, my hand found the challenge coin in my pocket. I pressed my thumb against the eagle on its face. Hello? The colonel said. His voice was gentle, but it carried to every corner of the room. I'm surprised to see you here. Good evening, Colonel, I said. Quiet, steady, the voice I use when it matters. He nodded once, then louder. Loud enough for Lorraine, for Kyle, for Megan, for every person at that table. Who are you to them? The question detonated silently, the way real explosions do. The light arrives before the sound, and for a fraction of a second everything is perfectly still. Every head turned. Lorraine was half out of her chair. She's my daughter, Jim. She works in... The colonel raised one hand, palm open, fingers straight. The command gesture. Universal. Unmistakable. Lorraine stopped. Captain? The colonel said, looking at me. The word landed on the table like a dropped glass. Would you state your name and unit for everyone at this table? I stood up. Chair back. Shoulders square. Not at attention. I wasn't in uniform. But close enough that every person at that table could feel the difference between someone who'd learned to stand in a dining room and someone who'd learned to stand on a parade ground. Captain Amber Townsend, I said, 3rd Quartermaster Battalion, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The silence was total. Not uncomfortable silence, not awkward silence. The kind of silence that happens when the floor of a room shifts and nobody knows where the walls are anymore. Megan looked at Kyle, her mouth open, no words. Kyle looked at Lorraine. Lorraine looked at the tablecloth. The colonel turned to face the table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I pinned the Army Commendation Medal on this woman 3 years ago at Fort Campbell, he said, for distinguished service during Operation Resolute Support, 12 months in Helmand Province. She managed the supply chain for 3 forward operating bases under active fire. Not once did a critical shipment fail under her watch. He paused. Let it register. And tonight, he said, her own family introduced her to me as a hotel manager. The word hotel cracked open like an egg against a counter edge, clean, final, and impossible to put back together. I could feel the air in the room rearrange itself. The colonel's friends looked at Lorraine. Megan's cousin looked at Kyle. Donna looked at me with an expression that was equal parts fury and heartbreak. And Lorraine, my mother, Lorraine Townsend, 58 years old, catering business owner, pearl-wearing, hairspray-scented, trembling-fingered Lorraine sat frozen in her chair with her mouth slightly open, and nothing, for the first time in her life, to say. The dam broke in slow motion. Lorraine stood. Her chair scraped against the hardwood, a sound like a nail on slate. "Jim, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said. "I never said. I just simplified things for conversation. You know how it is at dinner parties. People don't want to hear about." "Simplified?" the colonel said. He didn't look at her. He was still facing the table. "Mrs. Townsend, you told my wife your daughter doesn't have a career. You said she's been drifting." Donna spoke for the first time. Quiet. Precise. "Those were her exact words, Lorraine. Not much ambition. Those were the words she used." Lorraine's eyes went to Kyle, looking for backup, looking for the son who always stayed, who always agreed, who always carried her bags. Kyle was staring at his hands. His phone sat face up on the table. The last text he'd sent me was still visible on the screen. "Please don't make this weird." He couldn't look at me. Lorraine's voice cracked. Not from tears. From pressure. Like a pipe that's been holding too much for too long. "You don't understand our family, Colonel. Amber left us. She chose to leave when I needed her most. She chose the army over her own mother." She was shaking now. Her composure, the thing she'd built her whole identity around, was peeling away in sheets. And under it was something raw and old and much more honest than anything she'd said all evening. But she didn't know how to stop. She never had. The colonel looked at me. "Captain, would you like to say something?" I stood up again. I'd sat back down at some point. Instinct, maybe, or habit. I stood and I looked at the table. At Megan, whose engagement dinner had just become something else entirely. At Kyle, who still couldn't meet my eyes. At Donna, who had tears running down her face without making a sound. At the colonel, who stood beside me like a witness at a hearing. Then at Lorraine. "I enlisted in the United States Army at 18, I said. My voice was level. Clear. The voice I use when I'm briefing a commander, when every word has to carry its own weight because there's no room for filler. I earned my commission through officer candidate school at 22, Fort Benning, Georgia. I've deployed twice to Afghanistan and once to Kuwait. I've managed supply chains in combat zones where the nearest backup was a helicopter ride and a prayer. I've sat with soldiers who shipped out and never shipped home." I paused. Not for drama, for breath. "Mom told you I'm in hotel management. She told you I've been drifting. She's been telling people that story for 14 years. To neighbors, to Kyle's friends, to you." I looked at Lorraine. "I didn't come here tonight to correct you, Mom. I came here because Kyle is my brother, and I wanted to see him before I deploy again in 60 days. That's it. That's the only reason I drove 7 hours." I sat down. I placed my hands on the table, palms flat, fingers still. Done. Lorraine was leaning against the back of her chair like it was the only thing holding her upright. Her mouth moved. Nothing came out. She looked the way a building looks a half second before it drops. Still standing, but empty of everything that held it together. Lorraine walked out of the dining room. Not dramatically. Not with a door slam. She just stood up, pressed her napkin to the table, and walked out. I followed. Not to fight. Not to finish her off. Because I saw something in her face I hadn't seen in 14 years. Fear. Not the kind she performed. The theatrical worry about napkin folds and seating charts. Real fear. The kind that lives under everything else. She was in the hallway, leaning against the wall near the restroom door. Her hands were trembling again. This time, she wasn't hiding it. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small photograph. Wallet-sized, laminated, edges soft from years of handling. I knew the photo before I saw the face. I'd seen it once before, years ago, in a drawer she thought I didn't know about. Her mother, my grandmother, a young woman in a nurse's uniform, hair pinned back, looking at the camera with an expression that was half smile, half departure. She left when Lorraine was 11, said she needed to find herself, moved to Richmond, took a nursing job at a hospital downtown, never came back, never called on birthdays, never explained. She left when I was younger than you, Lorraine said. Her voice was stripped down to something I barely recognized. She said she had to go. She said it was important. She looked just like you when she said it. The same eyes. The same certainty. She touched the photograph with her thumb. When you enlisted, I saw her face. In yours. Like the door was already closing. So you made sure I had nothing to come back to, I said. She didn't answer. She just stood there, holding the photograph of a woman who left, raised by a woman who couldn't forgive leaving, raising a daughter she punished for the same sin. I walked back inside. When I sat back down, the colonel was standing at the head of the table again. He'd waited, not out of patience, out of precision. He knew exactly what he was doing. I'd like to finish my toast, he said. Nobody argued, nobody moved. Lorraine came back in and sat down. She didn't look at anyone. She looked at the tablecloth the way a person looks at a document they know they've signed wrong. I said that marriage requires honesty, the colonel continued. So does family. And tonight I've learned that this family has a daughter who has served her country with distinction, and a mother who erased her service to impress people she barely knows. The sentence landed like a gavel. Clean, final, precise. Lorraine flinched. A full-body flinch, the kind you can't fake and can't hide. Kyle was gripping the edge of the table with both hands, knuckles white, jaw locked. Megan looked at him, and it was the kind of look that asks a question no one wants to answer. You knew? The only embarrassment I see at this table, the colonel said, is a mother who erased her own daughter's service. He said it calmly, the way a man says something he's been thinking for 2 hours and has decided to say exactly once. He picked up his glass. To Kyle and Megan, he said, may your marriage be built on truth, even when the truth is hard. He drank. Donna drank. I drank. Kyle lifted his glass with a hand that wasn't quite steady. Lorraine didn't touch hers. After the toast, the colonel walked to my end of the table one more time. He stood in front of me, and the rest of the room receded. Captain Townsend, he said, I remember your ceremony clearly. You'd just come back from 12 months in Helmand. You managed the supply chain for 3 FOBs under fire. Fuel, rations, medical supplies, ammunition, in conditions that would have broken most people. He paused. The kind of pause that isn't about finding words. It's about choosing which ones deserve to be said. When I pinned that medal on you, you said something I wrote down that evening. You said, it's not about getting recognized, sir. It's about getting it done. He let it land. Well, tonight, you deserve to be recognized. He extended his hand. I shook it. Firm grip. Warm palm. 3 seconds. Donna stood and placed her hand on my shoulder. She squeezed once. The kind of squeeze that says everything a sentence can't. A mother should be the first person to tell the world who her daughter really is, Donna said. She looked at Lorraine when she said it. Not with anger. With something worse. Pity. I'm sorry yours didn't. I nodded. My throat was tight. My eyes were wet. But I didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of these people. Not because crying is weak. I've cried in a forward operating base at 3 a.m. when a supply convoy was hit. But because this room didn't deserve my tears. My tears were mine. The same way my service was mine. The same way my name was mine. I turned to Lorraine. She was sitting in her chair, hands in her lap, fingers interlaced, knuckles white. Her pearls had shifted to one side. Her makeup was intact, but her face beneath it had collapsed, the architecture of composure broken from the inside. I kept my mouth shut, Mom, I said. For 14 years. The colonel didn't. She opened her mouth, closed it. Opened it again. Nothing. I'm not angry, I said. I'm not going to yell at you in front of these people. That's not who I am. That was never who I am. I paused. But I need you to hear this. I am done being the daughter you wished I was instead of the one I actually am. I picked up my purse from the back of my chair. I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out the challenge coin. I held it for a moment, felt the weight of it, the eagle on one side, the battalion crest on the other. Then I placed it on the table, directly in front of Lorraine. That's from Colonel Harlan, I said. He gave it to me the day he gave me the medal you've never asked about. Keep it. Maybe it'll help you remember who I am next time you introduce me. I straightened my dress. I looked at Kyle, who was standing near the door now, jaw working, eyes wet. I looked at Megan, who was watching Kyle the way you watch someone you're not sure you know anymore. I looked at the colonel. He gave me a single nod. I walked out of the dining room, through the hallway with the burgundy carpet and the dim sconce lighting, through the front door, and into the Virginia night. The parking lot was half full. The mountains were black shapes against a navy sky. The air smelled like cedar and asphalt, and I could hear the muffled hum of the restaurant behind me. Music, dishes, the ordinary sounds of a place where most people were having an ordinary evening. Kyle caught up to me at my rental car. Amber, wait. Don't leave like this. I turned. He was standing under a parking lot light, tie loosened, face flushed, looking younger than 28, and older than I'd ever seen him. Like what, Kyle? I didn't know she told them. I mean, I knew she said some stuff, but I didn't know she made up a whole. You knew enough, I said. You told me not to talk about the army stuff. You told Megan I'd been traveling. You didn't lie as big as Mom, but you carried her bags. I was trying to protect. Protect what? I said. Your insurance pitch to her dad? He didn't answer. His mouth opened, closed. He looked at the ground, at his shoes, at the cracks in the asphalt, anywhere but at me. Kyle, I said, I love you. You're my brother. But I can't keep being the person this family is ashamed of when there's nothing to be ashamed of. He looked up, eyes wet, chin trembling. When you're ready to know who I actually am, not who Mom told you I am, you know where to find me. Fort Campbell, 3rd Quartermaster Battalion. I'm not hard to find. I got in the car, closed the door, started the engine. He stood in the parking lot light for a long time, watching me pull away. I learned later what happened inside after I left. Megan pulled Kyle to a corner of the dining room. Her voice was low, but her words carried the precision of a woman raised by a colonel. You told me she was a drifter, Kyle. She's a captain in the United States Army. You lied to me. I didn't lie. I let Mom handle the story. That is the lie. She walked away from him, back to her father's side. Kyle stood alone near the bread station looking at the empty chair where I'd been sitting. At the challenge coin that still sat on the table in front of Lorraine's untouched glass. The colonel spoke last. He addressed Lorraine directly, standing, hands at his sides. Mrs. Townsend, I respect your son. I care for my daughter. And I wish your family well. But I need you to say something. He paused. I've commanded thousands of soldiers in my career. I can tell you without hesitation that Captain Townsend is someone I'd trust with my own people's lives. The fact that you couldn't see that, that's not her failure. It's yours. Lorraine sat alone at the table after that. The servers cleared dessert plates around her. The white roses she'd arranged 2 hours earlier were starting to droop. She didn't move. She didn't cry. She just sat there, holding the challenge coin in her palm, looking at it like she'd never seen one before. I sat in my rental car in the parking lot for 5 minutes before I drove anywhere. Engine running, headlights on, the Blue Ridge Mountains framed in the windshield like a postcard from a place I used to live. My phone rang. Donna Harlan. Captain Townsend, I wanted to make sure you're all right. I appreciate that, Mrs. Harlan. I'm okay. A pause, the kind that has warmth in it. What you did in there, the restraint, The way you kept your composure while your own mother was. She stopped herself. Started again. That took more courage than anything I've seen at a dinner table, and I've sat at a lot of dinner tables. Thank you, ma'am. For what it's worth, Jim and I would be proud to have you at any table in our home. Anytime. You hear me? Anytime. I closed my eyes. That sentence. From a military spouse. From a woman who understood what service meant because she'd lived beside it for 30 years. That sentence meant more than every word my mother had withheld for 14 years. Not because Donna Harlan was important. Because she was honest. I'll remember that, ma'am, I said. Thank you. I hung up and sat in the quiet of the car. I looked at the restaurant in the rearview mirror one last time. The lights were still on. People were still inside, rearranging the rubble of an evening that had started as an engagement dinner and ended as an unraveling. I put the car in drive, 7 hours back to Fort Campbell. I didn't play music. I drove in silence. And somewhere on Interstate 81, between Roanoke and the Tennessee state line, I said it out loud to no one. I know exactly who I am to them, and who I am without them. The road unspooled ahead of me, dark and straight, and mine. 3 weeks later, I was back at Fort Campbell. Morning briefings, logistics meetings, supply manifests for the upcoming deployment. The routine that held me together, the way it always had. Kyle called twice. I answered the second time. He apologized. Not the full apology, not the one that reaches all the way back to the root, but enough to crack a door. Megan made me tell her everything, he said. About the Army, about your deployments, about what Mom's been saying for years. She said if I can't be honest about my own sister, how can she trust me to be honest about anything? They were still engaged, but Megan had set a condition. Kyle had to rebuild a relationship with me. On my terms. Not Lorraine's, not his. Mine. Lorraine hadn't called. I expected that. Her pattern was silence. When confronted with a truth she couldn't control, she went quiet. Just like her own mother had gone quiet. She never saw the parallel. I didn't chase her. For the first time in 14 years, I didn't pick up the phone and try to bridge the gap she'd built. For the first time, I let the silence be hers to break. One thing arrived in the mail. A handwritten note on cream-colored stationery, no return address on the envelope. 2 sentences, written in the steady hand of a man who'd signed 1,000 orders. Captain, your service honors us all. Never let anyone reduce what you've earned. I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk, next to my deployment orders, right where I could see it every morning. I spent 14 years letting my mother's version of me be the only story anyone heard. And then one evening, at a dinner table in Roanoke, Virginia, a retired colonel asked a simple question. And I learned that the people who truly see you don't need your silence to be comfortable around you. That's my story. 1 phone call at 2 in the morning, 1 dinner, and 1 colonel who said what my mother never could. If this story reminded you that your service, whatever kind it is, matters, even when the people closest to you refuse to see it, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.